Veteran followed the dog to a cliff in the fog. What they found inside the cave shocked the town. Veteran followed the dog to a cliff in the fog. What they found inside the cave shocked the town. You're about to witness one of the most incredible discoveries ever made in a small American town. This story will take you on a journey that defies belief and reveals secrets hidden for decades. If you're as amazed by this story as we are, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and activate those notifications so you never miss our extraordinary content. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of what's about to unfold. Let's begin this remarkable adventure. The October fog rolled in from the Pacific like a living thing, swallowing the coastal town of Mendocino, California, in its gray embrace. Former Navy SEAL Marcus Thompson stood on the deck of his small cabin, watching the wall of mist advance through the redwood trees. At 35, he'd seen fog in a dozen different countries, but there was something about the Northern California coast that made it feel almost mystical. Marcus had moved to Mendocino 6 months ago, seeking the kind of peace that only came from isolation. After 12 years in the Navy, including 4 tours in the Middle East, he'd earned his quiet retirement. The disability pension from the shrapnel in his left leg wasn't much, but it was enough to rent this small cabin on the outskirts of town and live simply. The fog was so thick this morning that Marcus could barely see the edge of his property line, just 50 feet away. He was about to go back inside when he heard it, a dog barking somewhere in the mist. The sound was urgent, almost frantic, and it seemed to be coming from the direction of the coastal cliffs about a quarter-mile from his cabin. Marcus listened carefully. Living alone had made him attuned to every sound in his environment, and this wasn't the playful bark of a dog chasing a ball or the territorial warning of a guard dog. This was distress. He grabbed his jacket and a heavy-duty flashlight, then headed into the fog. The barking grew louder as he made his way through the dense redwood forest that separated his cabin from the cliff face. The sound of crashing waves below grew stronger, and Marcus knew he was getting close to the dangerous drop-off that lined this section of the Mendocino coast. "Hello?" Marcus called out. "Is someone there? Is your dog okay?" The barking stopped suddenly, replaced by an eerie silence that the fog seemed to amplify. Marcus continued forward cautiously, using his flashlight to navigate between the massive tree trunks. The beam barely penetrated 3 feet into the gray wall of mist. Then he saw it, a medium-sized dog standing at the very edge of the cliff, looking back at him with intelligent brown eyes. The animal was a mixed breed, part golden retriever and part something else, with a thick coat that was damp from the fog. What struck Marcus immediately was how calm the dog appeared now that he had arrived. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus said softly, approaching slowly. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The dog wagged its tail once, then did something unexpected. It barked once more and began walking along the cliff edge, looking back at Marcus as if expecting him to follow. Marcus hesitated. The fog was so thick he could barely see the dog, and the cliff face here dropped nearly 200 feet to jagged rocks below. But something in the animal's behavior suggested intelligence and purpose, rather than random wandering. "All right, boy, but we're staying well back from that edge," Marcus said, following the dog at a safe distance. The dog led him along the cliff face for about 100 yards before stopping at a spot where the rock formation created a natural shelter from the wind. Marcus could hear the ocean more clearly here, and he realized they were at one of the many small inlets that dotted this section of coast. The dog sat down and looked directly at Marcus, then at something to his right. Marcus followed the animal's gaze and saw what appeared to be the mouth of a cave, partially hidden behind a curtain of fog and overgrown vegetation. "What is it, boy? You want me to check out the cave?" The dog barked once and wagged its tail, then walked directly to the cave entrance and disappeared inside. Marcus stood at the mouth of the cave, peering into the darkness beyond his flashlight's reach. The opening was about 6 feet high and maybe 4 feet wide. large enough for a person to walk through comfortably, but small enough that it could easily be missed by someone passing by. "This is probably a bad idea," Marcus muttered to himself, but he found himself stepping into the cave anyway. The passage went back about 20 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across limestone walls that had been carved smooth by centuries of water action. The cave was dry now, well above the current high tide mark, but the formation suggested it had once been a sea cave. The dog was sitting in the middle of the chamber, waiting patiently for Marcus to catch up. "Okay, so you brought me to a cave," Marcus said. "What's so special about—" He stopped mid-sentence as his flashlight beam hit something that definitely didn't belong in a natural sea cave. Along the far wall, partially hidden behind a rock formation, was what appeared to be a wooden crate about the size of a coffin. Marcus approached cautiously, his military training making him alert for any signs of danger. The crate was old. The wood was weathered and stained with salt and moisture, but it appeared to be intact. Metal bands held it together, and there was a small brass nameplate on the top that was too corroded to read. The dog walked over to the crate and placed its front paws on the lid, looking at Marcus expectantly. "You want me to open it?" Marcus asked. As if in response, the dog barked once and jumped down from the crate. Marcus examined the metal bands more closely. They were secured with old-fashioned clasps rather than locks, suggesting that whoever had placed the crate here hadn't intended for it to be permanently sealed. The clasps were corroded, but still functional. With some effort, Marcus managed to work the first clasp open, then the second. The wooden lid was heavy, but it lifted with only moderate resistance. What Marcus found inside made him sit down hard on the cave floor. The crate was filled with what appeared to be historical artifacts, all carefully wrapped in oiled cloth and arranged with obvious care. Marcus lifted out the first item, a leather-bound journal wrapped in waterproof material. The cover was embossed with a date, 1942. He opened the journal carefully, and the first page took his breath away. Personal log of Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, USS Mendocino. If this journal is found, it means our mission has been compromised and I am likely dead. The cargo we carry must not fall into enemy hands. Marcus's hands were shaking as he continued reading. According to the journal, the USS Mendocino had been a Navy destroyer operating along the California coast during World War II, conducting classified missions related to preventing Japanese submarine attacks on American shipping. But this wasn't just any Navy ship. It had been carrying something incredibly valuable and dangerous. November 15th, 1942, Marcus read aloud in the quiet cave. "We have successfully intercepted the Japanese cargo submarine I-26, 40 miles north of San Francisco. The enemy vessel was carrying what appears to be stolen American technology. Prototype radar equipment that would give the Japanese Navy a significant advantage in the Pacific theater." The dog sat quietly beside Marcus as he continued reading, as if understanding the importance of what was being discovered. The journal entries painted a picture of a desperate naval battle in the fog-shrouded waters off Mendocino. The USS Mendocino had managed to sink the Japanese submarine, but not before taking significant damage itself. Lieutenant Commander Morrison had made the decision to hide the recovered technology rather than risk it falling into enemy hands if his ship was sunk. "The prototype equipment is too valuable to lose," another entry read. "I have ordered a landing party to conceal the cargo in sea caves along the coast. If we don't survive, at least the technology will be safe until American forces can recover it." Marcus looked around the cave with new understanding. This wasn't just any random cave. It was a World War II-era hiding place used by American forces to protect valuable military technology from enemy capture. But the journal entries suggested there was much more than just radar equipment hidden here. Marcus carefully lifted more items from the crate. There were technical manuals, photographs of electronic equipment, and what appeared to be prototype vacuum tubes and other early electronics components. But at the bottom of the crate, wrapped in multiple layers of oiled cloth, he found something that made his military training kick into high alert. It was a small metal container about the size of a coffee can with radiation warning symbols and text in both English and what appeared to be German. Marcus set the container down very carefully and picked up a document that had been wrapped with it. The paper was yellowed with age, but the typed text was still readable. Classified, Top Secret Office of Strategic Services. Subject, Project Manhattan. Recovered materials. The attached radioactive materials were recovered from enemy submarine I-26 during engagement off California coast, November 1942. Analysis indicates materials are enriched uranium samples, likely intended for German atomic weapons program. Critical. These materials must be secured at all costs. Enemy possession of this technology could alter the outcome of the war. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring at the document. He was looking at evidence of Nazi Germany's atomic weapons program from World War II. Uranium samples that had somehow ended up on a Japanese submarine off the California coast. The dog seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. It had moved closer to Marcus and was sitting alert and still, as if standing guard. Marcus continued reading through the documents. The story they told was incredible. The Japanese submarine I-26 had apparently been carrying not just stolen American radar technology, but also uranium samples provided by Nazi Germany as part of the Axis powers' collaboration on atomic weapons research. The USS Mendocino had intercepted the submarine in a running battle that lasted several hours in thick fog. Lieutenant Commander Morrison had managed to sink the enemy vessel, but his own ship had been severely damaged and was taking on water rapidly. Faced with the certainty that his ship would sink before reaching port, Morrison had made a command decision that probably saved American lives. He ordered his crew to hide the recovered materials in coastal caves, with the intention of returning to retrieve them once the immediate crisis had passed. But according to the journal entries, the USS Mendocino never made it back to port. The ship had gone down with all hands in the deep waters off the continental shelf, taking the secret of the hidden materials to the bottom of the ocean. Until now. Marcus spent the next hour carefully examining everything in the crate. Besides the uranium samples and technical documents, there were detailed maps of the coastline with other cave locations marked, suggesting that this wasn't the only hiding place Morrison had used. There were also personal items that made the historical figures more real. Photographs of Morrison with his crew, letters from his wife back in Ohio, and a small American flag that had apparently flown on the USS Mendocino. But it was the final document in the crate that truly shocked Marcus. It was a letter addressed to whoever finds these materials, dated November 20th, 1942, just 5 days before the USS Mendocino had sunk. To whoever finds these materials, if you are reading this, it means I have failed in my duty to return and recover what we fought so hard to protect. The cargo we intercepted represents both opportunity and terrible danger for our nation. The uranium samples must be turned over to American authorities immediately. In the wrong hands, these materials could be used to create weapons of unimaginable destruction. But in the right hands, they could help America win this war and secure peace for future generations. I pray that whoever finds this is a patriot who will do the right thing. The sacrifices my men made must not be in vain. Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, USS Mendocino, United States Navy. Marcus looked at the dog, who had remained patiently beside him throughout his exploration of the crate's contents. "Well, boy, looks like you've led me to something pretty important," Marcus said softly. "The question is, what do I do with it now?" The responsible thing would be to contact the authorities immediately. These were clearly government materials, and the uranium samples potentially posed a public health risk if not handled properly. But Marcus also understood that discovery of World War II-era uranium samples would likely bring a flood of federal agents, historians, and media attention to the quiet town of Mendocino. Marcus carefully rewrapped all the materials and placed them back in the crate. He wasn't going to make any hasty decisions about something this significant. As he prepared to leave the cave, the dog stood up and walked to another section of the chamber that Marcus hadn't fully explored. The animal sat down next to what appeared to be another rock formation and barked once. "What now, boy? More hidden treasure?" Marcus walked over to investigate and discovered that what he'd taken for a natural rock formation was actually a carefully constructed stone wall. Behind it, he could see the edge of another wooden crate. It took Marcus 20 minutes to carefully dismantle enough of the stone wall to reach the second crate. This one was smaller than the first, but when he opened it, the contents were equally stunning. Inside were more documents, but these weren't military records. They were civilian items, bank records, property deeds, and personal documents belonging to families with German and Italian names. At first, Marcus was confused, but as he read more carefully, the picture became clear. During World War II, many German and Italian immigrants had faced suspicion and persecution, similar to what Japanese Americans had experienced. Some families had apparently entrusted their valuables and important documents to Lieutenant Commander Morrison for safekeeping, fearing that their property might be confiscated by the government. The documents represented the life savings and family histories of dozens of immigrant families who had been caught up in wartime hysteria. There were property deeds to farms and businesses, bank account information, family photographs, and even jewelry and family heirlooms. One letter, written in careful English by someone for whom it was clearly a second language, particularly moved Marcus. "Dear Commander Morrison, my family has lived in Mendocino for 20 years. We are good Americans, but people now look at us with suspicion because we came from Italy. We fear our property will be taken, our children will suffer. Please keep these papers safe. When the war is over, maybe we can return to normal life. Giuseppe Benedetto." Marcus realized he wasn't just looking at military secrets. He was looking at the hidden history of an entire community during one of America's most challenging periods. The dog had been watching Marcus read, and when he looked up, the animal was staring at him intently, as if waiting for a decision. "This is bigger than just military hardware, isn't it, boy?" Marcus said. "These are people's lives we're talking about." Marcus spent another hour documenting everything he'd found, using his cell phone to photograph key documents while being careful not to disturb the originals. The cave contained enough historical material to rewrite the World War II history of the entire Mendocino coast. But as he prepared to leave, Marcus noticed something else. In the back corner of the cave, partially hidden by shadows, there appeared to be carved symbols on the wall. When he examined them with his flashlight, he found what looked like Native American petroglyphs, images that were clearly much older than the World War II materials. The symbols depicted what appeared to be ships, people, and various animals. Marcus wasn't an expert in Native American culture, but the images seemed to tell a story of encounters between indigenous peoples and outsiders arriving by sea. "This cave has been important for a lot longer than 70 years, Marcus told the dog. "I bet the local tribes knew about this place long before any Navy ships showed up." As Marcus and the dog made their way back through the fog toward his cabin, he found himself facing a dilemma that was both simple and complex. The simple part was clear. He needed to contact authorities and turn over materials that belonged to the government and to families who might still be living in the area. The complex part was figuring out how to do that without destroying the quiet life he'd built in Mendocino, and without turning the discovery into a media circus that could harm the community. Back at his cabin, Marcus did the first sensible thing he could think of. He called the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to someone about a historical discovery. 20 minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Maria Santos was sitting at Marcus's kitchen table, listening to his story with growing amazement. "You're telling me you found a World War II cache in a sea cave?" she asked. "That's just the beginning," Marcus said, showing her some of the photographs he'd taken. "There are uranium samples, classified documents, and personal property belonging to local families from the 1940s. Deputy Santos studied the photos carefully. She was a 20-year veteran of the Sheriff's Department and had grown up in Mendocino, but she'd never heard any stories about Navy ships hiding materials in local caves. "Mr. Thompson, if what you're telling me is true, this is going to be very big news. I need to contact my supervisor, and we'll probably need to bring in federal agencies to handle the military materials." "I understand," Marcus said, "but I'm hoping we can do this in a way that respects the community. Some of these documents belong to local families, and they deserve to know their history before it becomes a federal investigation." Deputy Santos nodded. She'd lived in Mendocino long enough to understand the value of community trust. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "Let me talk to Sheriff Williams and see if we can figure out a way to handle this properly." That evening, Marcus returned to the cave with proper lighting equipment and a camera. The dog, who had apparently decided to adopt Marcus, led the way confidently through the fog. Marcus was beginning to suspect that this animal had been visiting the cave for some time and had been waiting for the right person to show it to. With better lighting, Marcus was able to make a more thorough examination of the cave and its contents. He discovered that there were actually 3 separate hiding spots, the 2 wooden crates he'd already found, plus a third cache hidden beneath loose rocks near the cave entrance. The third cache contained more personal items, family photographs, children's toys, wedding rings, and other precious belongings that families had entrusted to Lieutenant Commander Morrison. There was also a detailed list, written in Morrison's handwriting, documenting everything that had been hidden and which family it belonged to. Giuseppe Benedetto, farm deed, bank documents, wife's jewelry, Marcus read from the list. Antonio Rossi, business papers, family photographs. Heinrich Müller, citizenship documents, children's birth certificates. The list went on for 2 pages, documenting the possessions of more than 30 families. At the bottom, Morrison had written, "These people trusted me with their most precious belongings. I pray I can return them when this madness is over." Marcus realized that Morrison had not only been protecting military secrets, he had been protecting the dreams and memories of an entire immigrant community during one of the darkest periods in American history. The next morning, Sheriff Williams arrived at Marcus's cabin, accompanied by Deputy Santos and an elderly woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the director of the Mendocino County Historical Society. "Deputy Santos briefed me on your discovery," Sheriff Williams said. "Before we bring in federal agencies, Dr. Chen wanted to examine the materials to verify their historical significance." Dr. Chen was a small woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and an obvious passion for local history. She listened intently as Marcus described everything he'd found, occasionally asking detailed questions about specific documents and artifacts. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "We've always known that Mendocino played a role in coastal defense during World War II, but we had no idea that anything like this had happened." "What about the families mentioned in Morrison's list?" Marcus asked. "Are any of them still in the area?" Dr. Chen's eyes lit up. "Oh my, yes. The Benedettos still own the farm on Highway 128. Tony Rossi's grandson runs the Italian restaurant on Main Street, and Heinrich Müller's daughter Maria married into the Santos family." She looked at Deputy Santos, who had gone pale. "Maria, your grandmother was Maria Müller before she married your grandfather." Deputy Santos stared at Dr. Chen. "You're telling me my grandmother's family is mentioned in these documents? According to what Marcus found, your great-grandfather Heinrich Müller entrusted his family's citizenship papers and other documents to Lieutenant Commander Morrison in 1942. Dr. Chen explained. "Your family's history is literally hidden in that cave." The weight of the discovery suddenly became personal for Deputy Santos. This wasn't just historical artifacts. This was her own family's story. Sheriff Williams made a decision that would prove crucial to how the discovery was handled. Instead of immediately contacting federal agencies, he chose to give the community a chance to understand what had been found before outside authorities took control. "Dr. Chen, I want you to work with Marcus to document everything in that cave," he said. "We'll secure the site and give you 48 hours to create a complete record before we contact the FBI and other federal agencies." "What about the uranium samples?" Marcus asked. "Those could be dangerous." "We'll contact hazardous materials experts from the state to handle those safely," Sheriff Williams said. "But the historical materials deserve to be understood by the community first." Over the next 2 days, Marcus, Dr. Chen, and a small team of local historians worked to carefully document everything in the cave. The dog, who Dr. Chen had started calling Navigator, remained a constant presence, seeming to understand the importance of their work. They discovered that the cave contained not just World War II materials, but artifacts spanning several centuries. The Native American petroglyphs were identified by a local tribal elder as Pomo artwork, depicting the arrival of Russian fur traders in the 1800s. The cave had apparently been a significant location for multiple cultures over hundreds of years. But it was the World War II materials that captured everyone's attention. The documents told a story of courage and sacrifice that went far beyond military action. Lieutenant Commander Morrison had not just been a Navy officer, he had been a protector of an entire community during a time of fear and uncertainty. The personal items belonging to immigrant families were particularly moving. There were children's drawings, love letters between husbands and wives separated by war, and photographs of family celebrations that had been interrupted by suspicion and prejudice. Dr. Chen discovered that many of the families mentioned in Morrison's list had never retrieved their belongings. Some had moved away during the war, others had died, never knowing their possessions were safe. But several families were still in the Mendocino area, and they were about to receive an unexpected gift from the past. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Williams organized a community meeting at the local high school. Word had spread through the small town about Marcus's discovery, and nearly 200 people crowded into the auditorium to hear the story. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to deeply emotional. Many were elderly residents who had lived through World War II, while others were younger people who had heard family stories about those difficult times. 3 days ago, I followed a dog to a sea cave in the fog, Marcus began. What I found there has changed my understanding of this community's history and reminded me why I'm proud to be an American. He told the story of Lieutenant Commander Morrison and the USS Mendocino, of the battle with the Japanese submarine, and of the decision to hide valuable materials rather than let them fall into enemy hands. But the part of the story that brought tears to many eyes was Morrison's role as protector of immigrant families' treasures. Lieutenant Commander Morrison didn't just protect military secrets, Marcus said. He protected the hopes and dreams of families who were being treated with suspicion simply because of where their grandparents had been born. Deputy Santos stepped forward to share her own family's connection to the discovery. She held up a photograph that had been found in the cave, a picture of her great-grandfather Heinrich Müller with his wife and children standing in front of the house where Maria Santos had grown up. My great-grandfather was terrified that his family would lose everything because people thought German immigrants couldn't be trusted, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lieutenant Commander Morrison promised to keep their documents safe. 75 years later, he kept that promise. Dr. Chen then invited several elderly community members to the stage. These were descendants of families whose belongings had been hidden in the cave. Giuseppe Benedetto III, whose grandfather had entrusted the family farm deed to Morrison, was presented with the original document along with his grandmother's wedding jewelry. The 85-year-old man broke down in tears as he held items he thought had been lost forever. "My nonno always told us stories about the American Navy officer who promised to keep our papers safe," he said through his tears. "We thought they were just stories, but they were real. It was all real." Similar scenes played out as other families were reunited with their history. Wedding rings, citizenship papers, family photographs and business documents were returned to descendants who had grown up hearing fragments of stories about the nice Navy man who had helped their grandparents during the war. But Marcus wasn't finished with his presentation. He had saved the most important part for last. "There's something else we found in the cave," he said. "Something that belongs to all of us." He showed slides of the Native American petroglyphs, explaining how Dr. Chen and local tribal representatives had determined that the cave had been a sacred and significant location for centuries before World War II. "This discovery isn't just about one war or one group of people," Marcus said. "It's about how this land has been a place of refuge and protection for many different communities throughout history." The tribal elder who had helped interpret the petroglyphs, Robert Pomo, stepped forward to address the crowd. "My ancestors knew this cave as a place of visions and safety," he said. "They drew pictures on the walls to tell future generations about important events. It seems like that tradition continued, even if the people doing it didn't know about the old stories." The community meeting concluded with Sheriff Williams announcing that federal authorities would be taking custody of the military materials the following week, but that the Historical Society would be creating a permanent exhibit featuring reproductions of all the documents and artifacts. "This discovery belongs to Mendocino," he said. "It tells our story, and it's staying here where it belongs." Marcus returned to his cabin that evening feeling exhausted but satisfied. The dog, Navigator, had remained by his side throughout the day, seeming to understand that his job was complete. But the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, Marcus received a phone call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a historian from the Smithsonian Institution who had heard about the discovery. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling because the materials you found may be connected to something we've been researching for years," she said. "We have evidence that several Navy ships conducted similar operations along the West Coast during World War II. Your discovery could be the key to understanding a classified program that has remained secret for decades." Dr. Mitchell explained that the Smithsonian had been working with the Navy to declassify documents related to coastal defense operations during World War II. The discovery in the Mendocino Cave provided missing pieces to a puzzle that historians had been trying to solve for years. The USS Mendocino was part of Operation Neptune Shield, she explained. It was a classified program designed to prevent enemy submarines from establishing bases along the American coast. Your Lieutenant Commander Morrison was one of several officers who were authorized to hide sensitive materials if their ships were in danger of capture. According to Dr. Mitchell, there might be similar caches hidden along the coast, from Oregon to Southern California, all containing materials hidden by Navy crews during the war. "Would you be willing to work with us to search for other sites?" she asked. Marcus looked at Navigator, who was sitting alertly beside him as if following the conversation. "I think I might know someone who could help with that," Marcus said. Over the following months, Marcus found himself transformed from a quiet retiree to an accidental expert in World War II coastal operations. Working with Dr. Mitchell, the Smithsonian, and the U.S. Navy, he used the maps found in Morrison's cache to locate 3 more hidden sites along the Mendocino coast. Each discovery revealed more pieces of the story. One cave contained radar equipment that had been years ahead of its time. Another held documents related to Japanese-American families who had been forced into internment camps but had entrusted their valuables to sympathetic neighbors. But the most significant discovery came when Navigator led them to a cave complex nearly 10 miles south of the original site. This cave contained something that hadn't been hidden during World War II. It contained materials that were much more recent. The cache included documents and equipment from the Cold War era, suggesting that the cave system had been used by American intelligence services for decades after World War II ended. There were surveillance reports on Soviet fishing vessels that had operated off the California coast in the 1960s, communication equipment from the 1970s, and documents related to monitoring Chinese submarine activities in the 1980s. Dr. Mitchell was amazed. "This isn't just a World War II discovery," she told Marcus. "This is evidence of a continuous intelligence operation that ran for nearly 50 years. The most recent documents in the cave were dated 1989, suggesting that the intelligence operation had ended around the time the Cold War concluded. But there was one more surprise waiting. In the deepest part of the cave complex, Navigator led them to a section that contained personal items belonging to the intelligence operatives who had used the caves over the decades. Among these items, Marcus found a leather wallet containing the identification of Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, Jr., the son of the World War II officer who had started it all. A letter found with the wallet explained that Morrison's son had followed in his father's footsteps, joining the army and eventually being assigned to the same coastal intelligence operation his father had helped establish. He had used the caves for decades, continuing his father's work of protecting American interests from hidden enemies. "It seems like serving your country in secret runs in some families," Dr. Mitchell observed. Marcus understood that feeling better than most. His own military service had involved classified operations that he could never discuss publicly. There was something fitting about discovering the hidden legacy of others who had served in the shadows. The discovery of the extended cave system and its Cold War materials brought even more federal attention to Mendocino. The FBI, CIA, and Navy all sent representatives to examine the materials and interview Marcus about exactly how he had found everything. But the federal investigators were uniformly impressed by how the local community had handled the discovery. Instead of sensationalizing the find or exploiting it for personal gain, the people of Mendocino had treated it as a trust to be preserved and shared responsibly. Sheriff Williams was commended by state officials for his decision to let the community examine the historical materials before federal agencies took control. Dr. Chen received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to create a comprehensive exhibit about the discovery. And Marcus found himself in demand as a speaker, sharing the story of the cave discovery with military groups, historical societies, and community organizations across California. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the initial discovery, Marcus received a letter from the Department of the Navy. Inside was a formal citation recognizing his service in preserving important naval history, along with an invitation to attend a ceremony in Washington, D.C. The ceremony was held at the Naval Heritage Center, where Marcus was introduced to Admiral Patricia Morrison, the granddaughter of Lieutenant Commander James Morrison and the niece of Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, Jr. "My family has been looking for evidence of my grandfather's final mission for decades," she told Marcus. "We knew he had died in service to his country, but we never knew the details of what he had accomplished." Admiral Morrison explained that the Morrison family had maintained a tradition of military service for generations, but they had never known the full story of their World War II patriarch's sacrifice. "Because of what you found, we finally understand what kind of man he was," she said. "He wasn't just a Navy officer who died in battle. He was a protector who gave his life to keep dangerous technology away from America's enemies and to preserve the dreams of innocent families who were caught up in wartime fear." The ceremony concluded with Marcus receiving the Navy's highest civilian honor, the Distinguished Public Service Award, for his role in preserving naval history and protecting materials that were still considered sensitive. But for Marcus, the real reward was simpler than any medal or ceremony. After returning to Mendocino, he found that Navigator had settled permanently into life at the cabin. The dog had apparently decided that his mission was complete and that Marcus was his new partner. The two of them established a routine of daily walks along the coast, often visiting the original cave where everything had started. The site had been secured and was being preserved as a historical landmark, but Marcus and Navigator were given special permission to visit whenever they wanted. On foggy mornings like the one when it all began, Marcus would stand at the edge of the cliff with Navigator beside him, looking out at the grey wall of mist rolling in from the Pacific. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Marcus would say to the dog. "You knew that cave needed to be found by the right person at the right time." Navigator would wag his tail and bark once, as if agreeing. The discovery had changed Marcus's life in ways he never could have anticipated. He had come to Mendocino seeking quiet retirement, but instead he had found purpose and community. The town had embraced him as the man who had helped reveal their hidden history, and he had found a sense of belonging that had been missing since his military service ended. Dr. Chen offered him a position with the Historical Society, working to preserve and interpret the cave discoveries. The pay wasn't much, but it was meaningful work that used his military experience and attention to detail. Marcus also found himself serving as an unofficial guardian of the cave system, working with federal agencies to ensure that any future discoveries were handled with the same respect for community and history that had characterized the original find. But perhaps most importantly, the discovery had reminded Marcus that service to country didn't end when military duty concluded. There were many ways to serve, and sometimes the most important service happened when you weren't looking for it. 1 year after following Navigator into the fog, Marcus stood before another community gathering in the Mendocino High School auditorium. This time, he wasn't telling the story of a discovery. He was celebrating the completion of the permanent exhibit at the Historical Society. The exhibit, titled Hidden in Plain Sight: Mendocino's Secret History, featured recreations of the cave chambers, reproductions of key documents, and interactive displays that told the story of Lieutenant Commander Morrison and the families he had protected. But the centerpiece of the exhibit was a wall dedicated to the ongoing legacy of service represented by the discovery. It featured photographs and stories of local veterans from every American war, including recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Morrison and his crew made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our community during World War II, Marcus told the crowd. But they're not the only heroes this town has produced. Service and sacrifice are ongoing traditions here. The exhibit had attracted visitors from around the world, including descendants of Morrison's crew, relatives of the immigrant families whose belongings had been preserved, and military historians researching similar discoveries along the West Coast. But the visitors Marcus enjoyed most were the local school children who came on field trips. Their eyes would widen as they learned about the secret cave filled with treasure, and they would ask endless questions about what it felt like to make such an amazing discovery. "The most important thing to remember," Marcus would tell them, "is that heroes aren't always famous. Sometimes the most important people are the ones who do the right thing when nobody's watching, who keep promises even when it's dangerous, and who protect others even when they can't be thanked for it." Navigator, now officially recognized as the Historical Society's Chief Discovery Officer, would sit beside Marcus during these presentations, seeming to understand that he was part of the story being told. The dog had become something of a local celebrity, featured in newspaper articles and television reports about the discovery, but he seemed most content during their quiet walks along the coast, still alert for any signs of hidden history waiting to be revealed. 2 years after the initial discovery, Marcus received a call that brought the story full circle. Dr. Mitchell from the Smithsonian called to tell him that Navigator's story had inspired the creation of a new program. "We're establishing the Navigator Initiative," she explained. "It's a program to train dogs to detect historical artifacts and assist in archaeological discoveries. Navigator is going to be the founding member. The program would work with military working dog trainers to develop techniques for using canines to locate hidden historical sites. Navigator would serve as both a test subject and a trainer for other dogs, passing on his apparent natural ability to detect important discoveries." "It seems like Navigator found his calling," Dr. Mitchell said. Marcus looked at the dog, who was sitting alertly by the phone as if following the conversation. "I think we both did," Marcus replied. The Navigator Initiative proved to be incredibly successful. Within its first year, dogs trained using techniques developed by studying Navigator had helped locate hidden caches of historical materials in 5 different states. Each discovery revealed new pieces of America's hidden history, stories of sacrifice, courage, and service that had been waiting decades or even centuries to be told. But for Marcus and Navigator, the most meaningful discoveries remained the ones they made together during their daily walks along the Mendocino coast. They had found 3 more small caches of World War II materials, several Native American artifact sites, and even evidence of 19th century shipwrecks that had previously been unknown. Each discovery was handled with the same care and respect for community that had characterized the original cave find. Marcus had learned that the way you handle history is just as important as what you discover. On the 3rd anniversary of the cave discovery, Marcus stood once again at the edge of the cliff where Navigator had first led him into the fog. The weather was almost identical, thick mist rolling in from the Pacific, reducing visibility to just a few feet. But this time, Marcus wasn't alone. Behind him stood a group of children from the local elementary school, all wearing bright safety vests and holding hands in a long chain as they followed their teacher and Marcus toward the historical marker that had been erected at the cave site. Navigator led the group, now wearing an official vest that identified him as a historical detection specialist. At 12 years old, he was beginning to show his age, but his sense of purpose remained as strong as ever. "Mr. Thompson?" asked 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, whose great-great-grandfather had been one of the immigrant families Morrison had helped. "Do you think there are more caves with treasure in them?" Marcus smiled, looking out at the wall of fog that hid countless possibilities along the rugged coast. "I think there are stories hidden everywhere, Emma," he said. "The trick is knowing how to look for them and what to do when you find them. And having a good dog," added her classmate Tommy. "Definitely having a good dog," Marcus agreed, reaching down to scratch Navigator behind the ears. As the fog began to lift slightly, revealing glimpses of the rocky coastline beyond, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that first morning when he'd heard a dog barking in the mist. He had come to Mendocino seeking solitude and peace. Instead, he had found community, purpose, and a way to continue serving his country that he never could have imagined. The discovery had taught him that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's something that shapes the present and influences the future. The courage and sacrifice of people like Lieutenant Commander Morrison and his crew continued to inspire new generations of Americans to serve their communities and their country. And sometimes, Marcus reflected, the most important discoveries happen when you're willing to follow an unexpected guide into the unknown, trusting that the journey will lead somewhere meaningful, even when you can't see where you're going. Navigator barked once, as if agreeing with Marcus's thoughts, then started walking back toward the trail that led to town. The fog was beginning to clear, and it was time to head home. But Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new chances to serve, and perhaps new discoveries waiting in the mist. After all, Navigator was still listening for sounds that only he could hear, still watching for signs that only he could see. And Marcus had learned to trust that when his four-legged partner showed interest in something, it was worth investigating. The veteran and his dog walked back through the clearing fog toward the town that had become their home, carrying with them the knowledge that they had helped preserve an important piece of American history and ensured that the sacrifices of previous generations would not be forgotten. Behind them, the cave stood ready to tell its story to future visitors. A reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected forms and that the most important treasures are sometimes hidden in the most unlikely places, waiting for the right person and the right dog to bring them to light. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery. If Marcus and Navigator's story inspired you as much as it inspired us, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more amazing stories of hidden history and unlikely heroes. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest content. What did you think about the way this small community handled such an important historical discovery? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to share this story with others who might need to hear about the hidden heroes and forgotten stories that surround us every day.